The Petronas Sepang International Circuit is usually a place of deafening noise and relentless humidity, but on the morning of day 3, a strange, heavy silence hung over the factory garages. The 2026 preseason was supposed to be a predictable affair, a game of incremental gains and data collection, but something had shifted. For decades, the path to MotoGP glory followed a strict, almost religious doctrine: be smooth, carry corner speed, and respect the prototype. Then came Toprak Razgatlioglu. The three-time world Superbike king didn't just arrive in the paddock, he invaded it. While the established stars were refining their aero packages, a lone Yamaha M1, stripped of its rear winglets and looking dangerously naked, began doing things a MotoGP bike shouldn't be capable of. It wasn't just fast, it was violent. The Turkish rider was entering turn 1 with his rear tire hovering inches off the asphalt. A Stoppie at over 100 miles per hour that defied every law of physics the paddock held dear. Inside the rival garages, the high-definition monitors went still. No one inside the paddock expected what would unfold next, and it would change everything for him, his team, and the entire 2026 season. But behind that calm expression in the Pramac Yamaha garage, pressure was building fast. Toprak wasn't just fighting the clock, he was fighting a machine that was fundamentally rejecting his DNA. At 185 centimeters, he is the tallest rider on the grid. In the world of MotoGP, where aerodynamics are measured in millimeters, his height was a technical nightmare. The engineers had been forced into a desperate compromise, raising the front end and lowering the seat just to fit his frame. The result? A configuration that pushed the bike past the legal height limit when rear wings were attached. Toprak was forced to ride naked, without the aerodynamic downforce every other rider relied on for stability. Yet the telemetry coming back to the Yamaha engineers was staggering. While rivals like Pecco Bagnaia and Marc Marquez utilized sophisticated ride height devices to keep their bikes planted, Toprak was using raw, unadulterated physical strength to muscle the M1 into submission. His breaking points weren't just late, they were offensive. He was pulling the lever deeper than any data scientist thought possible, yet the bike wasn't washing out. It was pivoting. But as the morning session ended, the Stoprak magic was about to face its first real test, and the paddock discovered something that left even his closest team members stunned. Inside the garage, whispers began spreading as the afternoon heat peaked. It wasn't just the fans watching the trackside screens, it was the rival crew chiefs. Data analysts from Ducati and KTM were seen hovering near the Yamaha monitors, trying to catch a glimpse of the impossible. The numbers didn't make sense. In the transition from extreme braking to mid-corner lean, Toprak was carrying a velocity that should have overloaded the front Michelin tire instantly. In MotoGP, the front tire is a fickle beast. Push it 1% too far and you're in the gravel. But Toprak's Superbike-style approach was somehow finding a loophole in the tire's construction. He wasn't following the smooth is fast mantra of the modern era. He was treating the M1 like a street-born weapon, sliding the rear to help the bike rotate, a technique that had been largely abandoned in the age of complex electronics. The tension in the paddock was no longer about lap times, it was about a philosophical rift. Some veterans claimed his style was a ticking time bomb, a high-speed incident waiting to happen. Yet, as the sun began to dip over the Sepang Strait, the real turning point happened away from the cameras, and it was a revelation that threatened to shatter the status quo of the 2026 grid. And from that moment, nothing would ever be the same for the old guard. The criticism started as a quiet hum: he's too aggressive, the Michelin tires won't hold, he'll tire himself out by lap 10. But the Kenan group, the tight-knit Turkish circle led by legend Kenan Sofuoglu, remained unmoved. They knew what the paddock didn't: Toprak doesn't adapt to bikes, he breaks them until they work for him. The internal conflict within Yamaha was palpable. Half the team wanted him to ride like Fabio Quartararo, smooth, fluid, and safe. The other half saw the future in Toprak's violence. During a closed-door debrief, reports suggested that the Turkish star was blunt with his feedback. He didn't want the bike to be easier to ride, he wanted it to be stronger under the stress of his late-braking maneuvers. He was demanding modified clip-on handlebars and a repositioning of the entire cockpit. He wasn't just a rider, he was a choreographer, redesigning the prototype around his own unorthodox movement. But as he exited the pits for his final run of the day, a new threat emerged, one that wasn't on the timesheets but in the very air he was breathing. Yet the real turning point happened during the final hour, when the track temperature began to drop and the glory laps were supposed to be over. This is where the collapse usually happens for Superbike transplants, the moment where the physical toll of a MotoGP machine becomes too much to bear. But Toprak didn't fade. Instead, he entered a state of flow that silenced the critics. In a full race simulation, his lap times remained within 1/10 of a second of each other, even as the tires began to degrade. The technical reason was explosive. By keeping the rear wheel in the air during entry, he was actually saving the rear tire from the heat cycles of heavy engine braking. It was a technical advantage no one had predicted. He was using a flaw in his style to solve a fundamental MotoGP problem. The atmosphere in the paddock shifted from curiosity to genuine fear. His rivals realized that this wasn't just a one-lap wonder from a talented newcomer. This was a sustained, calculated assault on the championship's logic. However, the twist that followed would change the championship narrative entirely. What happened next left even the most seasoned mechanics stunned. Late in the session, Yamaha finally managed to fit a stealth, aerodynamic package that complied with the height regulations while accommodating Toprak's tall frame. The moment the rear wings were attached, the anomaly became something even more terrifying. "The bike stops much better like this," Toprak casually told his crew chief, Phil Marin. He hadn't even been at 100% capacity. The previous 3 days had been a handicap test, and he was still topping the sectors. The realization hit the paddock like a high-side crash. Toprak wasn't just adapting to MotoGP, he was currently the fastest rider on the grid while still in his learning phase. The psychological pressure on the established champions was now visible. In the cooling area, faces were grim. They weren't just fighting a new rider, they were fighting a new era of racing physics that they weren't prepared for. The Turkish star had officially transitioned from a curiosity to a clear and present danger. As the checkers flew on the final day of the Sepang test, the scoreboard told a story that many in the paddock refused to believe. Toprak Razgatlioglu was no longer the outsider. He was the benchmark. The 2026 season was no longer a battle of the aliens. It was a battle of Toprak versus the field. He had sent a staggering message to every factory team: the era of the smooth, data-driven procession was over. The era of raw, late-breaking violence had begun. He wasn't just there to participate. He was there to make history, to be the first Turkish rider to lift the Premier Class trophy. But as the teams packed their crates for the first round of the season, one question lingered in the humid Malaysian air, a question that would haunt every rival's sleep until the lights went out at the first GP. Would the established champions find a way to replicate his impossible technique? Or was the 2026 season already decided before the first green flag had even waved? Yet this was only the beginning of a far bigger storm, and what happens when the lights go out in Qatar will leave the world of motorsports completely breathless.